I smoothed the silver chain at my throat, rehearsing the one lesson I'd mastered: never let them see the truth beneath the surface. This wasn't a family dinner. It was an arena, and my brother was about to cast the first stone. My brother leaned back in his chair, crystal glass in hand, smirking the way he always did when he wanted to feel taller. Still wearing fake jewelry, Ivy. His words sliced through the clinking of silverware and the polite laughter of his colleagues. I heard a few quiet chuckles around the table, the kind that pretended to be harmless but bled with judgment. The diamonds in my earrings caught the golden light of the chandelier glittering back at him. I smiled. Because if I'd learned anything growing up as Nathan Morgan's little sister, it was this: you don't need to defend yourself when time will do it for you. The Meridian Room at the Crescent Hotel was the kind of place where every napkin weighed more than the monthly rent of my old apartment. Nathan loved that. The power, the attention, the performance of success. He was a financial consultant, now partner track. As he never failed to remind everyone, and tonight's dinner was his self-congratulatory feast after landing a high-profile account. The invitation had read family only. But I knew what that meant. He wanted an audience, not company. His wife Clara sat beside him in a silk gown the color of champagne, her diamond bracelet glinting every time she moved her hand to reach for her wine. She didn't say much at first, just smiled that careful social smile that told everyone she was perfectly aware of her husband's ego, but had decided to let him play king for the night. "Don't take it personally," Nathan added, slicing into his steak. "You've always had a minimalist style. I suppose it works for your art stuff." "Design studio," I corrected quietly. He grinned. "Right, that Etsy thing." A ripple of amusement moved through the table. I laughed too, but mine sounded different, lower controlled. I'd promised myself not to react. Not tonight. Because tonight, I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to observe. Clara leaned forward, her voice sugar-coated with sympathy. "You must be doing well, though, Ivy. That necklace, it's bold." I touched the chain at my throat, the silver links warm against my skin. "It's a prototype," I said. "Not released yet." "Prototype," Nathan echoed. "For your little shop. For a brand you'll know soon enough." I answered, holding his gaze. He laughed loud and sharp. The waiter, a young man trying not to look uncomfortable, refilled my water glass without meeting my eyes. "You always were a dreamer," Nathan said. "I'll give you that." Dreamer. That was the word he used when we were kids, too, when I built things from scrap metal and clay, while he recited the stock market section of the newspaper at 12 years old. Our parents adored his ambition. I was creative, which in our family meant unpredictable, unserious, and his favorite word, small. Dinner dragged on in an endless cycle of wine laughter and Nathan's anecdotes about himself. I watched him perform perfect posture, expensive cufflinks, a gleam of self-importance that filled every corner of the room. When he spoke, the others leaned in. When I did, they smiled politely and looked away. By dessert, Clara was glowing under the candlelight. Her bracelet shimmered with the kind of quiet arrogance only money could buy. I noticed the way she'd glance at Nathan whenever she laughed, like checking if she was laughing correctly. There was something fragile about it, something rehearsed. "You should come to one of my charity galas sometime," she said to me suddenly. "It might be inspiring." "Maybe I will," I replied. "But I'll probably be working." "Working," Nathan repeated, smirking. "You mean sketching jewelry no one can afford to make." "Actually," I said, "sketching jewelry no one else dares to make." The table went silent for a second, the air thick with discomfort. Then Nathan barked a laugh to break it. "Still got that attitude, huh? Guess that's why you're still single." I smiled again, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had already stopped needing his approval years ago. The waiter set down the check beside him. He signed it with a flourish, made sure everyone saw the black Amex card, then leaned back in satisfaction. Outside, the city was humming when I stepped onto the sidewalk. Clara's laughter still echoed faintly behind me as I breathed in the cold night air. A sleek black car waited at the curb, and my assistant Lila stepped out, phone in hand. "They confirmed it," she said, eyes shining. You're on the guest list for the Harper's Showcase. The Aurora chain goes live tonight. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm. Broadcast starts in an hour 30 minutes. They bumped you up the lineup. Apparently the press loved your story. Of course they did, I murmured, sliding into the car. As we drove through downtown, billboards flickered outside the tinted windows. I caught my reflection in the glass. Still the same simple dress, the same silver jewelry Nathan mocked. But on screen, the necklace was about to become something else entirely. The car stopped behind the theater where the red carpet shimmered under floodlights. Reporters clustered behind velvet ropes, calling out names, flashes bursting like fireworks. I stepped out slowly, the night air buzzing around me. Someone shouted, "That's her Ivy Morgan, the designer behind Aurora." The cameras swarmed. The lights found me. My necklace, my fake jewelry blazed like liquid fire under the flashes. I could almost hear Nathan's voice from dinner, still wearing fake jewelry. And somewhere across the city in their penthouse suite, I imagined Clara's gasp when she saw me appear on TV, walking the red carpet in a brand she could never afford, standing tall beneath the banner that read, "Aurora by Ivy Morgan." I didn't need to say a word. The world was doing it for me. Inside the theater, a reporter handed me the mic, her voice trembling with excitement. "Ivy, how does it feel to debut the most talked-about collection of the season?" I looked straight into the nearest camera. "It feels," I said softly, "like the end of pretending." The audience erupted. The flashes multiplied. For a brief moment, I thought of Nathan's laughter of all the years he told me I wasn't enough. And then the sound faded, replaced by applause, louder, brighter, real. As I stepped onto the stage, I whispered to myself, "Fake jewelry, no Nathan, just real revenge." The morning after this gala, New York felt quieter than usual. Or maybe it was just me. I sat by the window of my apartment, barefoot coffee cooling beside my laptop. My phone buzzed every few seconds. Messages, tags, press mentions. Aurora by Ivy Morgan had trended overnight, splashed across every major fashion blog, confirming I was the story everyone wanted. I scrolled through the headlines in disbelief. Who is Ivy Morgan, the woman behind the Aurora chain? From outsider to icon, the new face of ethical luxury. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just 12 hours earlier, I'd been too plain for my brother's world. Now I was the story everyone wanted. My assistant Lila burst in without knocking, holding a tablet. "You've gone viral. CNN just called you the ghost in gold." I laughed under my breath. "Guess fake jewelry photographs well." She grinned. "You should see the numbers. Harper's sold out the entire Aurora pre-order in 6 hours. You just broke their record." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I'd spent 5 years designing pieces I believed no one would ever wear, metalwork that blended industrial steel with recycled silver, meant to tell a story rather than impress a crowd. But last night under the floodlights, something shifted. The world had finally seen me not as Nathan's quiet sister, but as myself. Still, even victory comes with static. My inbox was full of messages from journalists, investors, and former colleagues who'd once ignored my calls. I scanned the queue and spotted a familiar name, Bram Fisher, Vesper Corp. Vesper had rejected my portfolio last year, calling it unmarketable. I opened his new email. It contained 2 words, "Congratulations. Call me." The quiet satisfaction of that moment, the world tilting in my favor, was better than any champagne. But among the congratulations was one name that made me freeze. Elaine DuPont, Ariel Foundation. Her message was short, lunch today, noon. Don't refuse. Elaine DuPont was more myth than woman in our world. The kind of person who didn't just build empires, she redefined them. In the 90s, she'd revolutionized fashion distribution, then vanished after selling her company for $800 million. For years, she'd been the subject of speculation, rumors of private mentorship programs, secret investments, silent influence. If she wanted to see me, it wasn't casual. By noon, I was sitting across from her in a quiet corner of the Glass House Cafe. She wore a black suit without jewelry, her white hair twisted into a low knot, her eyes sharp enough to slice through glass. "I watched you last night," she said, stirring her tea. You handled the cameras well. Thank you, I said carefully. You didn't expect it to blow up, did you? Not like that? She smiled faintly. That's the best kind of fame, the one you don't chase. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. You've got something rare, Ivy. Presence. But presence fades without precision. I can help you make it permanent. I hesitated. Help me how? By making sure your name doesn't disappear the moment another shiny trend walks in. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a card, Auriel, private consultation. I mentor women who have potential, but no protection, she said. You remind me of myself before I learned what power costs. I looked up. And what does it cost? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Everything you thought mattered. That night back in my apartment, I placed the card on my desk beside the prototype sketches for my next collection. Lila watched me with curiosity. Are you really considering it? She asked. I don't know. She's legendary Ivy, but people say she's ruthless. So was every man who ever told me to stay small, I replied. I slept little that night. Images from the gala replayed behind my eyelids. The cameras, the applause, the moment my brother's name flickered across the TV ticker as family of the mysterious designer. He hadn't called. Of course he hadn't. But I imagined him sitting in his office surrounded by the same colleagues who'd laughed at me during dinner, their smiles a little tighter now. By morning, I made my decision. I called Elaine. Her office was unlike anything I'd ever seen, minimalist to the point of intimidation. One long table of marble. No photos, no clutter. Just silence and the faint hum of the city outside. She gestured for me to sit. I did some research, she began. You grew up in a family that worshipped appearances. You built something that mocks them. That's poetic. I blinked, unsure if it was praise or an accusation. She continued, You're talented, but you still play nice. That's your weakness. I prefer to call it restraint. Restraint doesn't build legacies, she said flatly. Dominance does. Her words hit something raw in me. For years I'd fought to stay soft in a world that rewarded sharpness. To prove that creativity didn't have to scream to be powerful. But maybe she was right. Maybe the only way to stop being dismissed was to stop apologizing for existing. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Nothing, she said, except for you to stop asking for permission. She stood and handed me a small velvet box. Inside lay a bracelet of interlocked metal, silver, and gold, seamless, weighty. Your new signature, Elaine said. Consider it a beginning. What's it called? She looked at me for a long moment. Phase 2. The next few weeks moved like a storm. With Elaine's connections, Aurora expanded into global markets. Interviews, contracts, invitations. I was suddenly everywhere. But fame, I learned, has a heartbeat, and mine was racing too fast. One night as I left a charity event hosted by the same firm where Nathan worked, I heard his voice behind me. So it's true, he said. You're DuPont's new pet project. I turned. He looked older somehow, the arrogance in his posture shadowed by something else, fear. I guess the fake jewelry paid off, I said. He sneered. Don't get comfortable. People like you burn bright and fade fast. Maybe, I said softly, but at least I'm not standing in someone else's light. He stared at me, and for a second, I saw something flicker, resentment mixed with recognition. The same man who once mocked me now realized I was everything he pretended to be. As he walked away, Elaine's words echoed in my mind. Stop asking for permission. I didn't know then that this alliance, the mentor I admired, the brother I'd outshone, wasn't the end of a rivalry. It was the start of a reckoning. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what it would cost. The day I moved into the glass office at Auriel, it felt like stepping inside a mirage. Everything shimmered, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished chrome desks, the skyline painted across the glass like a moving photograph. Elaine didn't sit behind a desk. She stood at the window looking out at the city like she owned it. Maybe she did. Do you know what I love about glass? She asked without turning. Does it reflect everything? She smiled faintly. It hides nothing. Transparency terrifies people, especially men who built their power behind walls. I learned quickly that Oriel wasn't just a company. It was a machine of control. Everything Elaine touched moved like choreography. Every assistant designer investor, each orbiting her gravity with reverence and fear. I was no exception. She began training me the same day. Success isn't an art, it's a transaction. You dissect people until you know which part of them buys what you're selling. For weeks I followed her like a shadow. She took me to private dinners, boardrooms, and charity galas. I watched her manipulate rooms without ever raising her voice. One look, one pause, one carefully timed smile, she could make titans of industry stutter like interns. "You're too emotional," she told me one night after a client meeting. "You give away too much in your posture when they underestimate you. Never let them think you're anything but harmless. That's when they expose their weakness." I wanted to believe her. But late at night in the silence of my penthouse, I'd catch my reflection in the window and wonder if the woman staring back was still me, or someone she'd sculpted from ambition and fear. The Aurora expansion grew faster than anyone predicted. Elaine orchestrated everything: new investors, celebrity endorsements, global manufacturing deals. But every contract came with a catch. "We'll protect your name," she'd say, "but your company must remain under Oriel Holdings. Legal efficiency." I didn't realize until the third contract that under meant owned by. At first I told myself it didn't matter. The money was incredible, the recognition intoxicating. My designs were finally in vogue on red carpets and magazines that used to ignore my emails. I'd worked my entire life for this. But with every signature, I felt something slip, a quiet sense that I was no longer building my empire, just decorating hers. Nathan called the night my face appeared on the cover of Forbes Style. I hadn't heard his voice in months. "Congratulations," he said dryly. "You've officially become one of them. One of the people who think power makes them different from the rest of us." I laughed. "You always hated seeing me win." "I don't hate it," he said. "I just don't recognize you anymore." I heard him let out a long breath on the other end. "It's just, you look like you've actually won something real. I've spent 20 years trying to look like our dad, chasing his praise, and I'm still the same guy signing a check with a flourish. You look free. And I don't know if you're sacrificing things I wasn't brave enough to give up or just becoming another kind of monster." He hung up before I could answer. I sat in silence, staring at my own face on the magazine cover. Chin high, eyes sharp, the headline reading, "The Ice Queen of Innovation." I looked powerful, unshakable. But the woman in the photo didn't look kind. She didn't look human. The next morning, Elaine summoned me. "You did well," she said, tapping the magazine. "They're calling you the next DuPont." "I don't want to be the next anyone," I said. "I want to be myself." She laughed softly. "My dear, yourself is what got you ignored. You're famous because you became what they fear." Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face tightening slightly. "Cancel the afternoon meeting," she told her assistant. "We have a problem." She turned back to me. "Your brother. He's been talking to reporters. Something about family conflicts and creative integrity. I assume you've given him nothing to use." My stomach tightened. "He wouldn't he?" she interrupted. "Men like him hate watching a woman rise without their help. Silence him. Quickly." That evening I went to Nathan's apartment. It felt surreal standing in the hallway outside his door, listening to the muffled sound of his TV. When he opened it, his expression was unreadable, half surprise, half defiance. "Wow," he said. "The Queen herself. What brings you to the peasant's floor?" Elaine heard. "You've been talking to the press," I said. "Tell me it's not true." He smirked. "You think I need to leak anything? You're doing a fine job exposing yourself." I stepped closer. "Nathan, this isn't a game. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I do. You've become her." The words hit harder than I expected. "Her who DuPont," he said. "I saw the way you looked at me at that dinner. The way you looked down. You used to have fire, Ivy. Now you just have frost." He closed the door before I could speak. I stood there for a long time, my reflection in the hallway mirror staring back with glassy eyes. Back in my car, I scrolled through my messages. Elaine had texted one line, "Weakness is remembered. Eliminate it." I didn't know if she meant Nathan or myself. Days blurred into weeks. I threw myself into work, designing obsessively. Every piece of jewelry I made felt like a confession, cold metal shaped into beauty, trying to remember warmth. Elaine called them masterpieces. The press called them emotionless perfection. But one night while reviewing the quarterly reports, I noticed something strange. Beneath the financial summaries was a sealed folder labeled Project Astra. I clicked it open. Inside were documents, contracts, transfers, and confidential memos signed in my name. Some were for overseas factories I'd never approved. Others included environmental violations tied to Oriel subsidiaries. My breath caught. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room. And then I saw it, the digital signature at the bottom of every file. My own copied and pasted the date matching the days I'd been out of office with Elaine. She hadn't just built my success. She'd built my liability. Outside, the city lights reflected in the window, glittering like broken glass. I stared at them, realizing what Elaine had meant when she said transparency terrified people. Because in her world, even glass could hide something dark enough to destroy you. The next morning, I walked into Oriel's headquarters with the folder still open on my tablet. The glass doors hissed shut behind me, and the sound felt final, like being sealed inside something I no longer controlled. Elaine was already waiting in her office, standing by the window with her back to me, the skyline reflected in the smooth black glass behind her. "You found Astra," she said without turning. The casualness of her admission, the lack of surprise, made my blood run cold. She had been waiting for this. My fingers tightened around the tablet. "You forged my signature." She finally faced me, calm as ever. "I authorized efficiency. You were unavailable." "Unavailable." My voice cracked. "You used my name to approve contracts tied to illegal factories." Her eyes didn't flicker. "Factories that built your empire. Without them, Aurora would still be a hashtag, not a global brand." I stepped closer, my pulse hammering. "Do you even hear yourself perfectly?" She set her cup down. "Don't be naive, Ivy. Integrity is a luxury for people who haven't been hungry." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The woman I'd worshipped, the mentor who'd taught me power, was admitting it without a blink. "You used me," I whispered. "I refined you," she corrected. "Do you think anyone would have cared about your art without my name on the door?" Her words hit like acid. I turned to leave, but her voice followed me, low and even. "Walk away if you want. But remember, your name is on every document, every deal, every signature. You built this house of glass. I just gave you the tools." The elevator ride down felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked like a stranger, a woman wrapped in privilege, drowning in it. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was already buzzing. From Marcus, Legal Department. Subject, urgent review. Press inquiry about Project Astra. Panic burned through my chest. They knew. Someone outside the company had found the same files. I left the building without a plan, just motion. The rain had started, the kind that blurred lights into watercolor streaks. I walked until my heels hurt, ending up in a cafe across the street from the park. I sat down, trembling hands wrapped around a cup I didn't drink. My phone rang again. "Nathan." I hesitated, then answered. "What do you want?" "I could ask you the same," he said. "Your company's trending again. Not for the right reasons." My stomach turned. "You've seen it, half the city has. Word is Aurora's sustainability claims were fake. They're calling it corporate hypocrisy. People are asking if you knew." I didn't. He was quiet for a beat. "I believe you, but they won't." His voice softened, almost reluctant. "Listen, Ivy, if DuPont's pulling the strings, get out now. Before she decides you're expendable." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That Elaine still needed me. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she didn't need anyone. After the call, I opened my laptop. The headlines were everywhere. Aurora's dark secret luxury brand, tied to exploitation scandal. My face stared back from every article framed by words like liar and fraud. Within hours, my inbox filled with cancellations, endorsements, speaking events, collaborations. Investors were reevaluating partnerships. The empire Elaine had built around me was already starting to collapse. Lila called, her voice shaking. "They're pulling your billboard from Times Square." "Good," I said. "Maybe people will stop staring long enough for me to think." By nightfall, I was sitting alone in my apartment, lights off, the city outside humming like an engine of judgment. I opened the Astra files again, scrolling through pages of numbers, signatures, transactions. Somewhere in there was the proof I needed to clear my name. At 2 a.m., I found it. Hidden among the attachments was a transfer log dated 3 weeks before I joined Oriel. The signature line bore my name, but the timestamp proved it had been created months before Elaine even met me. A ghost signature predating my existence in her system. That was the leverage I needed. The next morning, I walked back into headquarters, hair still damp from the rain, my heartbeat steady. Now not fear, but purpose. Elaine looked up as I entered her office. "You're early," she said. "I'm done," I replied, dropping a printed page on her desk. "This proves you forged the Astra files before I worked here." She studied it unbothered. "And what will you do?" "Run to the press, the board. They're all mine. I'll find someone who's not." Her lips curved into something like amusement. "You're learning, but you're still thinking too small. You think this is about business. It's about legacy. Yours, mine, and the family name you're still trying to outgrow." Something in her tone changed, something cold and knowing. "You think I didn't check your history before taking you in," she said softly. "The Morgans built their wealth on exploitation. The factories your father invested in were worse than anything in Astra. You're not different from me, Ivy. You're just late to the truth." The blood drained from my face. "You're lying. Am I? Check the archives. Or better yet, call your brother." I left without another word. At home, I opened my father's old files records I'd inherited after his death, but never read. They were full of contracts, receipts, and investments. And there, buried in the pages, I founded a partnership with an offshore company registered under Morgan Industrial Holdings, the same name listed in the Astra documents. Elaine hadn't forged that part. She'd exposed it. I sat back, the realization cutting through me like glass. This was agonizing, crushing shame. I wasn't just betrayed. I was implicated. The rot was inherited. The sheer weight of that truth was worse than any lie Elaine could have told. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't need to look to know who it was. Elaine's message was simple. "Now you understand. The past doesn't die. It evolves." I closed the laptop, slowly staring at my reflection in the dark screen. For the first time, I couldn't tell whether I was the victim or the continuation of everything I'd tried to destroy. The rain outside had stopped, but the city still glistened slick and sharp like 1,000 shards of truth waiting to cut whoever touched them next. The day I moved into the glass office at Oriel, it felt like stepping inside a mirage. Everything shimmered, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished chrome desks, the skyline painted across the glass like a moving photograph. Elaine didn't sit behind a desk. She stood at the window, looking out at the city like she owned it. Maybe she did. "Do you know what I love about glass?" she asked without turning. "Does it reflect everything?" She smiled faintly. "It hides nothing. Transparency terrifies people, especially men who built their power behind walls." I learned quickly that Oriel wasn't just a company. It was a machine of control. Everything Elaine touched moved like choreography. Every assistant, designer, investor, each orbiting her gravity with reverence and fear. I was no exception. She began training me the same day. Success isn't an art, it's a transaction. You dissect people until you know which part of them buys what you're selling. For weeks I followed her like a shadow. She took me to private dinners, boardrooms, and charity galas. I watched her manipulate rooms without ever raising her voice. One look, one pause, one carefully timed smile she could make titans of industry stutter like interns. "You're too emotional," she told me one night after a client meeting. "You give away too much in your posture when they underestimate you. Never let them think you're anything but harmless. That's when they expose their weakness." I wanted to believe her, but late at night in the silence of my penthouse, I'd catch my reflection in the window and wonder if the woman staring back was still me, or someone she'd sculpted from ambition and fear. The Aurora expansion grew faster than anyone predicted. Elaine orchestrated everything: new investors, celebrity endorsements, global manufacturing deals. But every contract came with a catch. "We'll protect your name," she'd say, "but your company must remain under Oriel Holdings." Legal efficiency. I didn't realize until the third contract that under meant owned by. At first I told myself it didn't matter. The money was incredible, the recognition intoxicating. My designs were finally in vogue on red carpets and magazines that used to ignore my emails. I'd worked my entire life for this. But with every signature, I felt something slip, a quiet sense that I was no longer building my empire, just decorating hers. Nathan called the night my face appeared on the cover of Forbes Style. I hadn't heard his voice in months. "Congratulations," he said dryly. "You've officially become one of them. One of the people who think power makes them different from the rest of us." I laughed. "You always hated seeing me win." "I don't hate it," he said. "I just don't recognize you anymore." I heard him let out a long breath on the other end. "It's just, you look like you've actually won something real. I've spent 20 years trying to look like our dad, chasing his praise, and I'm still the same guy signing a check with a flourish. You look free. And I don't know if you're sacrificing things I wasn't brave enough to give up, or just becoming another kind of monster." He hung up before I could answer. I sat in silence, staring at my own face on the magazine cover. Chin high, eyes sharp, the headline reading, "The Ice Queen of Innovation." I looked powerful, unshakable. But the woman in the photo didn't look kind. She didn't look human. The next morning, Elaine summoned me. "You did well," she said, tapping the magazine. "They're calling you the next DuPont." "I don't want to be the next anyone," I said. "I want to be myself." She laughed softly. "My dear, yourself is what got you ignored. You're famous because you became what they fear." Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face tightening slightly. "Cancel the afternoon meeting," she told her assistant. "We have a problem." She turned back to me. "Your brother, he's been talking to reporters. Something about family conflicts and creative integrity. I assume you've given him nothing to use." My stomach tightened. "He wouldn't he?" she interrupted. "Men like him hate watching a woman rise without their help. Silence him. Quickly." That evening, I went to Nathan's apartment. It felt surreal standing in the hallway outside his door, listening to the muffled sound of his TV. When he opened it, his expression was unreadable, half surprise, half defiance. "Wow," he said. "The queen herself. What brings you to the peasant's floor?" "Elaine heard you've been talking to the press," I said. "Tell me it's not true." He smirked. "You think I need to leak anything? You're doing a fine job exposing yourself." I stepped closer. "Nathan, this isn't a game. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I do. You've become her." The words hit harder than I expected. "Her who DuPont," he said. "I saw the way you looked at me at that dinner. The way you looked down. You used to have fire ivy. Now you just have frost." He closed the door before I could speak. I stood there for a long time, my reflection in the hallway mirror staring back with glassy eyes. Back in my car, I scrolled through my messages. Elaine had texted one line, "Weaknesses remembered. Eliminate it." I didn't know if she meant Nathan or myself. Days blurred into weeks. I threw myself into work designing obsessively. Every piece of jewelry I made felt like a confession, cold metal shaped into beauty, trying to remember warmth. Elaine called them masterpieces. The press called them emotionless perfection. But one night, while reviewing the quarterly reports, I noticed something strange. Beneath the financial summaries was a sealed folder labeled Project Astra. I clicked it open. Inside were documents, contracts, transfers, and confidential memos signed in my name. Some were for overseas factories I'd never approved. Others included environmental violations tied to Oriel subsidiaries. My breath caught. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room. And then I saw it, the digital signature at the bottom of every file. My own copied and pasted the date matching the days I'd been out of office with Elaine. She hadn't just built my success. She'd built my liability. Outside, the city lights reflected in the window, glittering like broken glass. I stared at them, realizing what Elaine had meant when she said transparency terrified people. Because in her world, even glass could hide something dark enough to destroy you. The studio lights were blinding. They always were, but that night they felt like interrogation lamps instead of cameras. I sat in the green room waiting for my segment, my palms pressed together so tightly that the blood had stopped moving. Across from me, a monitor played the previous interview, a senator denying allegations, his smile smooth and rehearsed. I wondered if I looked the same. Dinah Harris entered, clipboard in hand, her professional calm masking a reporter's sharp instinct for the scoop. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." She nodded. "Just remember, truth isn't always redemption. Sometimes it's demolition. Are you okay with that? I'm done living in ruins someone else built." They wired a mic to my collar, powdered my face, and walked me under the heat of the stage lights. The world outside the cameras faded to silence. 3, 2, 1. "Good evening," Dana began, her voice perfectly modulated. "Tonight we sit down with Ivy Morgan, designer entrepreneur, and the woman at the center of the Aurora scandal. Ms. Morgan, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me." My voice barely sounded like mine. Dana didn't waste time. "Let's start simple. Did you know about Project Astra?" I met her gaze. "Not until 2 weeks ago, and yet your signature appears on every approval form." "Yes, because it was forged." She tilted her head slightly. "By whom?" I paused, the air thickening around me. "By someone who taught me that success means silence. I won't be silent anymore." Her next question hit harder. "Are you referring to Elaine DuPont?" The studio seemed to exhale. Even the camera operator looked up. "Yes," I said. "Elaine DuPont built an empire on manipulation. She used my name, my image, and my ambition to launder her own corruption. But I let her because I thought she was saving me from obscurity. I was wrong." Dana didn't interrupt. She just let me speak, the silence between questions becoming its own kind of confession. "My father's company was part of this system long before I was born," I continued. "I inherited his money, his privilege, and his guilt. And when I built Aurora, I thought I was creating something new, something clean. But it was just another illusion of purity made possible by dirty money." Dana leaned forward slightly. "That's an extraordinary admission. Why tell the world this now? Because if I don't, she'll control the narrative forever." When the cameras stopped, the silence afterward felt deafening. Dana stood, expression unreadable. "You just detonated your career," she said. "I know, but you also lit something bigger. Don't disappear. People will want more." As I left the studio, flashes exploded outside, reporters shouting, microphones thrust forward, questions overlapping like a storm. The bright flashes were popping like explosions. "Did Elaine force you? Were you complicit? Is this the end of Aurora?" I didn't answer any of them. I just kept walking, the night air sharp against my skin. Somewhere behind the chaos, I heard a familiar voice call my name. Nathan. He was leaning against a streetlight, hands in his jacket pockets, watching me with a look I couldn't read. "You really did it," he said when I reached him. "Yeah. I thought you'd wait until the lawyers told you to. I'm done waiting for permission." He smiled faintly. "Mom would have been proud." I laughed bitterly. Mom hated the spotlight. She hated pretense, he corrected. "You finally dropped yours." We stood there for a long moment, the street emptying around us. Then Nathan's expression shifted. "You should know Elaine's already moving. She's filing an injunction saying you violated an NDA. Let her," I said. "If she drags this into court, she'll expose herself." You think so? I know so. Back at my apartment, the night turned electric with noise messages, missed calls, notifications piling up faster than I could read. My name was everywhere. Some called me brave. Others called me a fraud, trying to rewrite history. But beneath the noise, one message stood out delivered from a blocked number. You wanted transparency. Let's see how you survive it. I deleted it, but the words stayed burned into my mind. At dawn, the city was still buzzing. News vans lined the block outside my building. I brewed coffee and turned on the TV. Elaine DuPont was already on air, composed immaculate, performing outrage like art. Ivy was like a daughter to me, she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. But her accusations are baseless. She's trying to deflect from her own mismanagement. I only hope she finds peace. The camera panned slightly, catching the hint of a smile on her lips. I threw the remote across the room. It shattered against the wall. My reflection stared back from the black screen, calm despite the chaos. The woman looking at me wasn't the same one who'd walked into Oriel months ago. She wasn't a protege anymore. She was a rival. Nathan called again later that morning. You see her interview? Yes. You gonna let her have the last word? No, I said quietly. I'm going to have the right word. The next 48 hours were a blur of strategy. My lawyer drafted statements, PR teams begged me to go quiet, and strangers on social media took sides like it was a sport. But I knew one thing: if I didn't fight this publicly, Elaine would bury me before the truth could breathe. By Friday, I had everything I needed. Proof of the forged documents, records of offshore accounts tied to her foundation, even correspondence linking her to the factories under investigation. When I sent the files to the Ledger, the city's most relentless investigative paper, I didn't include my name. I just typed a note for the woman who taught me that silence is survival. Here's what it costs. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the skyline glitter against the dark. My phone buzzed again, one last message. This isn't over. I smiled, taking a slow sip. No, I whispered to the city below. It's just beginning. The morning the story broke, the city woke up to my name on every screen. Exclusive DuPont Empire. Under federal investigation, insider source reveals forgery and fraud. They didn't need to say who the insider was. Every photo, every clip, every whisper traced back to me. Oriel's headquarters looked different that day. The lobby that once smelled of power now reeked of fear. Security guards whispered in corners. Executives moved in hurried packs, clutching phones like lifelines. And for the first time since I joined, Elaine DuPont's office door was closed. By noon, the board had convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. Lila texted updates from the inside. They're questioning her travel expenses. They found proof of money laundering. Elaine's losing control. I read every message with a strange, hollow calm. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, all I could think about was how easily admiration could curdle into vengeance. At 3:00, Elaine called me. Her voice was sharp, stripped of its usual elegance. You think you've won? She said. I think the truth has. You're naive, Ivy. Do you know what happens to whistleblowers? They burn first. Then everyone forgets who lit the match. I'm not afraid of fire anymore. You should be, she said, and hung up. 2 hours later, the building erupted. Reporters flooded the street outside. Federal agents escorted boxes of files through the glass doors. Cameras flashed like lightning. The image would be on every front page by morning, the empire of glass cracking from within. I stood across the street watching it all, anonymous under a gray hood. For the first time, Elaine DuPont looked small, her silhouette framed in the doorway as the agents led her out. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just looked straight ahead, chin high, as if she were still teaching the world how to command a room. When the car door shut behind her, I expected relief. What I felt instead was grief, sharp and unexpected. Because beneath everything she'd done, she had once believed in me. Or maybe she'd just believed in her own reflection through me. Nathan found me standing there long after the crowds had gone. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "It's over." He looked at the empty building. "No, it's not. You've got to rebuild now." "I don't even know what's left to rebuild." He smiled faintly. "Then start with what's real." That night I returned to my apartment. My phone was a graveyard of missed calls. Journalists, investors, old friends who suddenly wanted quotes instead of conversations. I turned it off and walked to my bedroom window. The skyline glowed faintly, the same one I'd watched when all I had were dreams too big to fit in my hands. I opened my laptop, deleted the logo for Aurora, and created a new file. One word appeared on the blank page: Rebirth. I didn't know what the new company would be yet. I just knew it wouldn't hide behind glass. The following week was chaos. Investigations widened, lawsuits filed, assets frozen. Elaine's empire. My former prison was collapsing publicly, beautifully. Each news anchor spoke her name like an incantation, part awe, part disgust. But fame has a way of burning everyone close to the flame. I wasn't spared. A tabloid headline read, "From protege to betrayer, did Ivy Morgan destroy her mentor for power, another designer, or double agent?" Sources claim Morgan knew everything. I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence was sometimes louder than denial. Still, it hurt. At a cafe downtown, a stranger approached me, phone raised. "Can I get a selfie?" she asked. "You're that girl who took DuPont down, right?" I smiled politely. "I'd rather just drink my coffee." "Suit yourself," she said. "Guess fame's expensive, huh?" I watched her walk away, her words echoing louder than the noise around me. That evening, Nathan came over with takeout and a grin that almost looked like peace. "You're trending again," he said. "Oh, great. This time for something good. People are calling you the face of corporate accountability." I laughed softly. "That's not a title I ever wanted." "Maybe not. But it's one you earned." We ate in silence for a while. He picked at his noodles, then said, "You know what's crazy? For all the damage she caused, Elaine still taught you something important." "What's that?" "How to fight like hell when no one believes you." Later, after he left, I found myself scrolling through old photos. One of them stopped me cold, me and Elaine at the Aurora launch party. She was smiling, her hand on my shoulder. In that picture, we looked like partners, equals. But I knew now that we'd both been pretending. The next morning, I received a call from the Ledger. "We're running a follow-up piece," the reporter said. "The public wants to know what's next for Ivy Morgan. Can we quote you?" "Yes," I said after a pause. "Tell them the glass broke and I finally saw who I was underneath it." That afternoon, I met Lila in the old Oriel building to collect my remaining belongings. The place was silent now, desks empty, lights dim. She hugged me before I left. "You did what none of us could," she said. "You told the truth." I smiled sadly. It shouldn't be that rare. As I stepped out into the fading light, I caught my reflection in the glass doors one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw her, the woman Elaine had shaped. Perfect posture, flawless surface, no cracks. Then the reflection shifted, and I saw someone new. Someone with scars, yes, but also eyes that no longer looked away. The city wind caught my hair as I walked away, the sound of sirens fading behind me. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from anyone. I was walking toward myself. 6 months passed before I heard her name again. By then, the city had moved on to its next scandal, its next downfall. Elaine Dupont was out on bail awaiting trial. Her empire dismantled and her name blacklisted across every industry she once ruled. I thought I'd buried that chapter for good until the envelope arrived. It was ivory heavy, embossed with a gold seal that felt too familiar. Inside was a single card, Aurora Revival Gala, benefiting the Global Sustainability Initiative venue. The Grand Meridian Hotel host, Jonathan Hale. At the bottom, written in flawless calligraphy, "Special Guest of Honor, Ivy Morgan." For a moment, I thought it was a joke. Aurora was dead, the name toxic. Whoever organized this either had no sense of irony or wanted to make a point. I flipped the card over. A handwritten note slid out. Redemption is just another word for rebranding. Let's talk. J.H. Jonathan Hale, CEO of Meridian Holdings and one of Elaine's former investors. The same man who had pulled out of the deal the night before the scandal hit, protecting his fortune and his reputation in one stroke. I should have ignored it, but curiosity is a form of gravity, and I was still learning how not to fall. 2 nights later, I found myself standing outside the Grand Meridian. The hotel shimmered under chandeliers the size of cars, the kind of place where reputations were bought and sold over champagne. Cameras flashed at the entrance guests stepping out of black cars in a parade of borrowed confidence. I wore black, simple, sharp, unbranded. No jewels this time. Just the quiet kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. Inside the ballroom glittered with excess. Faces I recognized from old boardrooms turned toward me, some curious, others cautious. My name rippled through the room like a rumor no one could resist repeating. Jonathan Hale found me within minutes. Tall, polished, the kind of man who thought charm could erase history. "Ms. Morgan," he said, taking my hand. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied. "You sent a very strange invitation." He smiled. "I find honesty disarming. And you, Ivy, are the most disarming woman in the city right now." We took seats at a private table overlooking the main floor. Waiters glided around us like shadows. The band played something smooth and meaningless. So I said, "What's the real reason you brought me here?" "I wanted to offer you an opportunity," he said, lowering his voice. Elaine's fall left a vacuum. Investors are hungry for leadership, someone with vision, credibility, a story the public already knows. "You mean a scandal they can market?" He shrugged. "Same thing." I studied him for a long moment. "You want to rebuild Aurora under a new name, using me as the face. I want to rebuild you." His tone was silk, but his eyes were all calculation. "You've already done the hardest part, survived. Now you need to own the narrative. Tell the world you've evolved." I almost laughed. "You sound just like her." "Elaine." His smile tightened. "I'm not her. I won't destroy my assets." The word assets landed like a slap. I stood, but he caught my wrist lightly, not enough to restrain, just enough to warn. "Think carefully," he said. "You could be back on magazine covers by summer, or you can stay a ghost of a fallen empire." I leaned closer, my voice quiet but cutting. "You still don't get it. I didn't burn the empire. I outgrew it." He released me, the smile returning brittle now. "Pity," he said. "There's always someone else willing to play the part." I left the table and walked through the ballroom, ignoring the eyes that followed. Halfway to the exit, I stopped. On the far side of the room near the stage, I saw her. Elaine. She looked thinner, older, but her presence was the same, controlled, deliberate. Her hair was pulled into a sleek knot, her gown understated, but immaculate. People kept their distance, unsure if proximity to her was poison or power. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, the noise faded. Then she smiled. Not the predatory kind I remembered, but something smaller, almost human. She raised her glass slightly, a silent toast before turning away. I walked out into the cold night breath visible in the air. The city glowed behind me, the skyline 1,000 glittering lies stacked on steel. Nathan called as I reached my car. "I saw your name trending again," he said. "You went to the gala?" "Yes." "Did she show up? She always does." He was quiet for a beat. "So what now?" "I think it's time I stop reacting to the story everyone else is writing. And start writing your own." Exactly. That night I didn't head straight home. I stopped at my studio. I opened my digital design files, pulled up the proposed new logo, and the branding deck Hale's team had slipped me, sleek, modern, and utterly hollow. I selected every file, hit delete, and purged the recycle bin. They wanted my face on their clean slate. I would not let them wipe away my dirt. I sat on my balcony with my laptop open, the cursor blinking on a blank page. The world expected a comeback, a glossy reinvention with perfect sound bites and redemption arcs. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted the truth. Not the weaponized kind Elaine had used. The kind that cleans instead of cuts. So I started typing. A memoir, maybe. A manifesto, definitely. The Glass Woman, How Success Taught Me to Shatter. Each word felt like pulling glass from my skin, painful, necessary cleansing. By dawn, I had written 10 pages. Not perfect, not polished, but real. The first story I'd told in years that didn't belong to anyone else. The city was waking again, its towers catching the first light. For the first time, I didn't see prisons of glass. I saw reflections flawed, bright, alive. And I finally saw myself in them. The memoir spread faster than I expected. What began as a series of late-night confessions on my laptop turned into essays passed hand-to-hand, blog to blog, until one morning I woke up to see my words quoted on the front page of the New York Ledger. "The woman who burned glass to see herself," the headline read. Below it, a single line from my writing power isn't stolen, it's traded for silence until you stop selling yourself cheap. Suddenly, I wasn't just Ivy Morgan, the disgraced designer, or the whistleblower who took down Elaine DuPont. I had become something else, an idea. And ideas, unlike people, don't apologize. My inbox overflowed. Publishers, talk shows, universities all wanted a piece of my story. But the strangest message came from an unknown sender. No greeting, no name. Just, "You're not finished yet." I deleted it, but something about those words clung to me, a whisper threading through every interview and headline. Not finished. Maybe it was right. Weeks later, I received an invitation to speak at the Global Women's Leadership Conference in Chicago. Thousands of attendees, cameras, the kind of platform I used to dream about when I was still invisible. I said yes. When I arrived, the air buzzed with energy. Women in suits and heels filled the convention hall, their laughter sharp and alive. The stage lights felt warmer this time, not accusatory, welcoming, almost forgiving. As I waited backstage, the coordinator leaned in. "Just speak from the heart," she said. "They already know your story. They want your truth." When I stepped onto the stage, applause erupted. I didn't flinch. 2 years ago, I was told that success was a ladder, that if I climbed quietly enough, smiled politely enough, and didn't look down, I could reach the top. What they didn't tell me was that the ladder was built over broken glass, and I was bleeding for someone else's empire. A murmur swept through the audience. I learned that silence isn't grace. It's permission. And I gave that permission to people who used my ambition like currency. I paused. But the funny thing about glass is it cuts both ways. The crowd was silent now, leaning forward. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, told you're too emotional, too plain, too much, remember, they're not describing you. They're describing their fear of you. The standing ovation hit like thunder. I smiled not for them, but for the woman I'd buried for so long. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been older than 25, nervous, but determined. "I just wanted to say," she began, "your story. It made me quit my job. My boss, he kept taking credit for my designs. I thought that's just how the world worked." "It doesn't," I said softly. "Or at least it doesn't have to." She smiled through tears. I started my own line. I named it Echo. "Echo," I asked, "because your story echoed mine." That night I sat alone in my hotel room, lights off the city glittering below. My phone buzzed with notifications, photos, mentions, endless praise. But none of it felt like victory. It felt like responsibility. The next morning, I woke to another headline, "Elaine DuPont to stand trial, prosecution cites insider testimony and financial records." I read every word. Heart pounding. She'd finally be held accountable. But the article ended with a line that made my chest tighten. Elaine DuPont declined comment. But sources say she intends to represent herself. Of course she did. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. Elaine's team reached out. She wants to meet before the trial. Why? She didn't say. But she insisted it be in person. I'm not going. Ivy. She still holds some documents tied to the Aurora accounts. If she releases them, it could drag your name back into the mess. You should hear her out. By evening, I was standing outside the detention center, wondering how I'd become the kind of woman who visits her own ghost. The guard led me into a cold, sterile room. Elaine sat at the table dressed in gray, her hair silver now but still immaculate. Her posture hadn't changed, regal, poised, untouchable. "Ivy," she said with that old, measured calm. "You look well. You look trapped." She smiled faintly. "I always admired your wit." I sat down across from her. "Why am I here? I wanted to see if you learned the right lesson. I learned that control built on fear always collapses." "Incorrect," she said. "It evolves. Power never disappears. It just changes hands." I leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time women stop inheriting the same kind of power men abuse." Her eyes narrowed. "You still think you're different from me?" "I know I am." She studied me for a long time, the silence heavy between us. "Then prove it," she said finally. "When they come for you, and they will don't become me." Before I could respond, the guard announced time was up. Elaine rose gracefully, turning toward the door. "Good luck, Ms. Morgan," she said over her shoulder. "You'll need it." I walked out into the sunlight, the wind cutting sharp against my face. For the first time, I understood what she meant. The fall of one tyrant doesn't erase the system that built her. Someone else would always be waiting to wear the crown. Back in my hotel room, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back wasn't naive anymore, but she wasn't hardened either, just awake. I picked up my notebook and wrote one last line for my manuscript. "The echo of power isn't silence, it's choice. And every woman who refuses to become her predecessor changes the sound of the world." Outside the city glimmered in the distance, still built on glass, still fragile, but catching the morning light in a way that almost looked like hope. The courthouse smelled like paper and tension. Every hallway hummed with whispers, the kind that follow both scandal and spectacle. I'd promised myself I wouldn't come, that I was done letting Elaine DuPont occupy space in my life, but promises have a way of breaking when closure calls your name. Reporters lined the marble steps outside, microphones thrust forward, flashbulbs popping like explosions. I kept my sunglasses on, my expression unreadable. A few shouted questions. "Did you and DuPont reconcile? Do you feel responsible for her downfall?" But I walked past them, each step deliberate, my heels clicking like a countdown. Inside the courtroom was colder than I expected. Elaine sat at the defense table, unflinching, her gray suit tailored to perfection. Even in ruin, she carried herself like a queen on a sinking throne. When our eyes met, she didn't blink. The prosecution began with precision. They laid out the evidence: falsified contracts, offshore accounts, employee testimonies, my own emails confirming how the Astra project had been executed under my forged signature. Every word was a mirror held up to her empire, reflecting everything she'd built and everything she'd buried. When my name was called to the stand, the room seemed to tighten. I walked forward, hands steady despite the storm inside. Sworn in, I sat facing her. The woman who had once been my mentor, my savior, my undoing. The prosecutor's questions were methodical. "Ms. Morgan, when did you first become aware of Project Astra 2 weeks before the scandal broke? And did you sign those documents?" "No. They were forged. By Ms. DuPont." "Yes." Elaine's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him off. "Overruled." "Continue. Why did you stay silent for so long?" "Because I believed her," I said. "Because I thought loyalty was the same as gratitude. And because I was too afraid to see the truth about the woman who taught me everything." Elaine's gaze was unwavering. I could feel it burning through me, dissecting every word, measuring whether I'd become her equal or her enemy. When the cross-examination came, she stood up by herself. The courtroom buzzed. Representing herself was her final act of control. She approached the stand slowly, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Ivy," she began, using my first name like a weapon. "You claim I forged your signature. But tell me, did you ever question the source of your sudden success?" "I did later." "Later," she echoed. "After you'd already built a fortune from it. After you'd taken every opportunity I gave you. I didn't know what it cost." "Of course you did," she said softly. The lie wasn't my forgery, Ivy. The lie was your silence. You wanted the power without the dirt. And the only difference between us is that I never lied to myself about the price. A sharp intake of breath echoed in the gallery. Her words found the precise, aching center of my guilt. I wasn't just defending myself. I was confessing. I stared back not with anger, but with the quiet acknowledgement that she was right about the lie of my ambition. You're wrong, I said, my voice low and steady. The difference is I stopped pretending the price was worth paying. The judge intervened, reminding her to step back. But Elaine had already made her point. She returned to her seat with the faintest smile as if she'd won something invisible. I stepped down from the stand, my knees weak, but my gaze fixed straight ahead. Elaine hadn't attacked my evidence. She had attacked my character, forcing me to confront the moral ambiguity of my own ambition in front of the world. She won the moral round, but I had laid the factual trap. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn for the day, I left through the side exit, avoiding the reporters. Outside, the air was cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Nathan was waiting by the car, his expression unreadable. How bad was it? He asked. She's still playing the game, I said. But this time, I'm not her opponent. I'm her evidence. I slid into the passenger seat, not speaking for a long moment. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving behind a profound emptiness. It wasn't relief yet, just a quiet, unsettling stillness like standing in the eye of a hurricane. The trial had forced me to tear down not just her, but the entire foundation of my life, and I felt utterly weightless. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of her voice kept looping in my head. You know the lie was shared. It stung because part of it was true. I had lied not to the world but to myself. I'd wanted her approval so badly that I'd ignored the cost. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed of the old office, the glass walls, the skyline stretching beyond them, and Elaine's reflection beside mine. Except this time, the glass didn't shatter. It melted, turning transparent, until she disappeared, leaving only me. The next day of testimony was brutal. Former employees spoke about forged audits, coerced signatures, silenced whistleblowers. Each voice added another crack in the empire's facade. But it was Marcus Blackwood, Oriel's former CFO, who delivered the final blow. He presented financial ledgers linking Elaine directly to fraudulent transfers. She used Ivy Morgan's name to hide the transactions, he said, voice steady. But the authorizations originated from her private account. Elaine didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands, eyes fixed on the judge, as though she'd been expecting this moment all along. When the verdict finally came 3 days later, the courtroom was packed. The judge's voice echoed against the marble guilty on all counts. The room erupted, press whispers, relief, outrage. But I sat still. Elaine remained calm until the bailiffs approached. Then finally she looked at me. "Congratulations," she said softly as they led her away. "You've learned how to destroy with elegance." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the reporters swarmed again, microphones flashing like lightning in the storm. Someone shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" I stopped, the word echoing in my chest. Vindicated? No. That wasn't what this was. This was survival. "I feel free," I said finally, then walked past them into the rain. Nathan caught up to me halfway down the steps, umbrella in hand. "You did it," he said. "No," I murmured. "I finished it." We stood there a moment longer, rain washing the city clean, or pretending to. The courthouse behind us loomed like a monument to everything broken and rebuilt. As I looked out at the city, the glass towers gleamed through the drizzle, each one reflecting the storm back into the clouds. For the first time, I didn't see myself trapped inside their reflections. I saw myself walking away from them. The invitation came a year after the trial. A sleek black envelope with my name embossed in gold. Inside was a single card, the Meridian Fashion Awards, honoring visionary designers of the year. My name was listed as one of the honorees. For a long time, I just stared at it, the letters catching the light like they were mocking me. The last time I'd worn a gown under flashing lights, I'd been the scandal, not the star. Part of me wanted to throw the invitation away. Another part, the one that had spent years shrinking so others could shine, wanted to walk through that room and own it. Nathan was the one who pushed me to go. "You've spent enough time proving what you're not," he said. "Maybe it's time you show them what you are." So I said yes. The night of the event, the city hummed like an orchestra tuning before a performance. Cameras lined the red carpet outside the Meridian Grand, their flashes painting everything in electric white. I sat in the back of a black town car, fingers brushing the fabric of my gown, a midnight blue creation I'd designed myself. Simple lines, no embellishments, but the fabric shimmered subtly under light. A quiet statement, elegance without apology. When I stepped out, the crowd gasped. I'd expected whispers, maybe even sneers, but what greeted me instead was applause. Not deafening, but genuine. The photographers shouted my name, the sound of it rolling like a tide I'd once drowned beneath. "Ivy." "Look this way, over the shoulder. Welcome back," I smiled. Not the polite manufactured smile I'd once practiced in mirrors, but something real, something earned. Inside the ballroom was a cathedral of glass and light. The chandeliers threw fractured rainbows across the walls, and for a moment I remembered standing here years ago as Elaine's shadow, watching her command attention while I hovered behind. Tonight the reflection was mine alone. Lila found me near the champagne table, radiant in silver. "I can't believe this," she said, hugging me. "You're actually here, after everything." I wasn't sure I could do it, I admitted. "Of course you could," she said. "You built something real from the ruins. That's rarer than perfection." As the ceremony began, I took my seat. Among designers I'd once envied. They nodded politely, some smiling with genuine warmth, others with thinly veiled curiosity. But I no longer felt the need to measure myself against anyone in that room. When my name was called, the applause was louder this time. I rose the gown whispering around me and walked to the stage. The lights were blinding, but I didn't shy away. The presenter smiled as he handed me the Crystal Award. "For courage, integrity, and redefining what leadership in fashion means, Ms. Ivy Morgan." I took the microphone, the weight of the room settling around me. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady. "When I first entered this industry, I thought beauty was something you could own, something polished, packaged, and sold. But beauty without truth is just decoration. And power without integrity is just costume jewelry. I learned that the hard way." A few people chuckled softly. I smiled. "The world doesn't need perfect women," I continued. "It needs honest ones. Women who can fail publicly and still stand up, who can be underestimated and still outlast everyone who doubted them." Applause rippled through the room. I glanced toward the back where I saw Nathan standing, arms crossed, pride written plainly across his face. When the ceremony ended, reporters swarmed near the exit. "Ivy, how does it feel to be back on top?" one asked. I smiled gently. "I'm not on top. I'm just finally standing on my own." Outside, the night air was cool, the flashes relentless. My car waited, but before I could get in, a familiar voice stopped me. Still wearing fake jewelry, I turned. Nathan grinned, teasing me the same way he had at that dinner all those months ago. I laughed. Only the kind that sparkles without needing validation. He handed me his phone. On the screen was a live stream from the event, me walking the red carpet, my name trending again. "Looks like they finally remembered who you are," he said. "No," I replied, watching the video. "They're just seeing who I've become." Across the street, a digital billboard flickered to life. My face appeared beside the words, "The Glass Woman, now a global bestseller." The memoir I'd written in sleepless nights had gone further than I ever imagined. Not because it glamorized pain, but because it named it, and in naming it, freed others to face their own. Reporters were still calling, fans shouting, the chaos of fame swirling around me. But amid it all, I felt a stillness. Not the silence of suppression, the calm of sovereignty. As we drove away, the city lights blurred into gold outside the window. Nathan turned to me. "So what's next?" I smiled, watching the skyline. Something that can't be built on glass. Later that night, after the after-party, after the noise and the cameras, I stood barefoot on my balcony, holding the award in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. The city glimmered below like a constellation of second chances. I thought of Elaine, then not with hatred but with understanding. She'd taught me how power corrupts when it's hoarded, how brilliance dies when it's caged. But she'd also taught me the one lesson she never intended, that survival isn't enough. You have to live. I looked up at the stars, their light steady and ancient. The woman who once hid behind others' brilliance was gone. In her place stood someone who didn't need to be seen to know her worth. The city hummed. Somewhere a camera flashed. I didn't turn. I didn't pose. I just breathed. The morning after the gala, I woke to the soft hum of the city below my window. The award sat on my nightstand, catching the sunlight that filtered through the curtains. For the first time in years, the light didn't hurt my eyes. It didn't feel harsh or revealing, it felt like peace. I made coffee and walked barefoot through my apartment, the same one I'd lived in when everything had fallen apart. Nothing about the place had changed: the same scuffed floors, the same framed sketches lining the walls, the same worn sofa, but I had changed. The space didn't feel small anymore. It felt earned. On the counter, my phone buzzed. I scrolled past the offers, invitations, and collaborations and stopped at one name that made my breath catch: Lydia Dupont, Elaine's daughter. The message was simple. I read your book. I think I understand now. Thank you for not destroying her completely. I stood there a long time rereading it. Gratitude and ache intertwined in my chest. Elaine had built empires and buried souls, including her own. And yet, even from the wreckage she left behind, something human still reached for understanding. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about recognizing that the cycle of inherited damage could finally be broken. Later that day, I met Nathan at a quiet cafe overlooking the park. The autumn trees were a riot of color, their reflections shimmering in the lake. He'd already ordered my drink the way he always did. "You're glowing," he said as I sat down. "It's the coffee." He laughed. "No, it's something else. You look free." I stirred my cup, thinking about that word. Freedom. It used to mean escape. Now it meant presence. It meant choosing where I stood instead of proving where I belonged. We talked for hours about the book, the interviews, the endless parade of people who now wanted a piece of the story they once ignored. But somewhere between the noise, I realized I didn't need to chase any of it. The story had already done what it needed to do. "I'm starting something new," I said finally. "A foundation. For women in design, those who were told to stay invisible until someone else stole their work." Nathan smiled. "A rebellion in heels." "A quiet one," I said. "The kind that lasts." That evening, I returned home and found an envelope waiting at my door. No name, no address, just a wax seal in the shape of an iris. Inside was a short handwritten note. "For every woman who learned to survive in silence, teach them to thrive in truth. E.D." For a moment I couldn't move. Elaine's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, elegant, deliberate. Whether she'd written it before the trial or somehow found a way to send it after, I didn't know. All I knew was that it wasn't vengeance that tied us anymore. It was a legacy. That night I pulled out my grandmother's old sketchbook, the one I'd kept hidden for years. Between the yellowed pages, I found a single unfinished design drawn in her careful hand, a necklace of intertwined glass and silver. She'd never completed it. I spent the night working. With every deliberate stroke of the soldering iron, I blended the fragile glass into the recycled silver. It was a statement of harmony, not conflict. A week later, the piece debuted quietly in my new collection, the Aurora line. The necklace shimmered under the gallery lights, its translucent glass capturing every color in the room. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about transparency, how something fragile could still refract light beautifully when it stopped pretending to be indestructible. People gathered around it, whispering words like grace, redemption, strength. But as I stood there, I didn't see any of that. I just saw the reflection of a woman who had finally stopped hiding. After the event, I slipped away to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below, a sea of windows reflecting 1,000 tiny versions of the same story: ambition, heartbreak, survival, rebirth. The wind tugged at my hair and I let it. Nathan joined me, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "there's something poetic about it. You built your empire out of glass and it didn't break." I smiled. It never had to. It just had to bend the light. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the city pulse with life. Before we left, I took one last look at the skyline. Every window glittered under the night sky, each one a tiny mirror. For the first time, I didn't see reflection as confinement. I saw it as evidence, proof that light always returns no matter how many times it's fractured. I turned to Nathan. "You remember what my brother said that night?" He nodded. "Something about fake jewelry." I laughed softly. "Yeah. Funny thing about glass, it can look fake until you realize it's the only thing that truly catches the light." When I got home, I placed the necklace on my dresser beside the award. Two symbols of the same truth, one forged in pain, the other in purpose. I stood before the mirror and looked at the woman staring back. Not the broken designer, not the scandal, not the survivor, just me. And for once, that was enough. The next morning I began drafting a new story, not about revenge or downfall or glass ceilings, about beginnings, about how women rebuild empires not from ashes, but from reflection. I smiled as the first words appeared on the page. My new line, named Reflection, launched next spring. It was not built on vengeance, but on the quiet, indestructible strength of women who choose to see clearly.